The moment my daughter pointed at me and said, "You're the reason my marriage is falling apart," I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. I stood frozen in the middle of her anniversary party, too shocked to speak. For months, she had been pulling away from me, blaming me for problems I didn't understand. But hearing those words in front of our entire family shattered something inside me. Then her husband Ethan slowly rose from his chair. His face had gone pale, and when he finally spoke, the words that came out of his mouth changed all of our lives forever. "No," he said quietly. "Joanna isn't the one destroying this marriage." Before anyone could react, the room fell completely silent. If you've ever had your heart broken by someone you love, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touches you in any way, please consider liking and subscribing so we can share more journeys together. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel and connecting with people around the world. My name is Joanna Berry, and at 64 years old, I thought I understood heartbreak. I thought I understood loss when my husband Michael died 12 years ago after a sudden heart attack. I thought I understood sacrifice when I worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over my daughter's head while grieving a man I had loved for more than 3 decades. I thought I understood loneliness when the house became silent after Natalie left for college. But nothing prepared me for the pain of watching my own daughter slowly stop trusting me. Natalie had always been my world. When Michael died, she was only 26 years old. She had already graduated college and started building a career in marketing, but she was still my little girl. During those dark months after the funeral, it was Natalie who sat beside me on the couch and made sure I ate. She was the one who called every evening to check on me. We became even closer after losing Michael. People often told us we were more like best friends than mother and daughter. For years, I believed that would never change. Then, Ethan Carter entered our lives. The first time I met him was at a small Italian restaurant in downtown Columbus. Natalie was smiling before she even walked through the door. A mother notices things like that. She looked happier than I had seen her in years. When Ethan shook my hand, he seemed respectful, confident, and kind. He listened when others spoke. He remembered details people shared. He asked me questions about my life and actually seemed interested in the answers. By the end of dinner, I found myself thinking that Natalie had chosen a good man. I wasn't the only one. Everyone loved him. My sister loved him. My friends loved him. Even Michael's older brother, who distrusted almost everyone, said Ethan seemed genuine. Looking back now, I realize how easy it is to trust someone who knows exactly what people want to see. 2 years later, Natalie and Ethan got married. It was a beautiful wedding. The ceremony took place in a historic church just outside Columbus. Natalie walked down the aisle wearing a dress she had dreamed about since she was a teenager. I remember crying as I watched her, not because I was losing a daughter, because I was gaining confidence that she would be loved and protected. At least, that's what I believed. I helped pay for that wedding, not because Natalie asked, because I wanted to. Michael had left a modest life insurance policy, and I had saved carefully over the years. Helping my daughter start her future felt like exactly what that money should be used for. When Natalie and Ethan decided to buy their first home, I helped again. Nothing extravagant, just enough to make the down payment possible. I never considered it a sacrifice. I considered it a privilege. A few years later, Sophie was born. The moment I held my granddaughter for the first time, I felt a kind of joy I didn't know existed. She had Natalie's eyes, Michael's smile, and somehow she wrapped all of us around her tiny finger from the very beginning. I became the grandmother who showed up for everything: school plays, doctor appointments, babysitting emergencies, dance recitals. Whenever Natalie needed help, I was there, and I was happy to be there, at least in the beginning. The changes happened slowly, so slowly that I almost missed them. Natalie stopped calling every day. Then she stopped calling every week. Instead of long conversations, I received short text messages. Busy today. Talk later? Everything's fine. At first, I didn't think much about it. Life gets busy. Marriage changes routines. Children create chaos. I understood all of that. But there was something else. Something I couldn't explain. Whenever I visited their house, I felt like I was interrupting something. Natalie seemed distracted, nervous, sometimes even guilty. If I suggested staying for coffee, she would glance toward Ethan before answering. It wasn't obvious. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed. But mothers notice things. One afternoon, while Sophie colored at the kitchen table, Natalie and I were talking about her work. She mentioned feeling overwhelmed. I gently suggested hiring part-time help for a few months. A simple suggestion, the kind of advice mothers give every day. Natalie immediately became defensive. "I don't need people telling me how to run my life, Mom." The words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't telling her how to run her life. I was trying to help. I laughed awkwardly and changed the subject. But the exchange stayed with me. A week later, something similar happened. Then again, and again. Every conversation seemed to end with Natalie becoming irritated. Every attempt to help felt unwelcome. I started questioning myself. Maybe I was being too involved. Maybe I was offering too much advice. Maybe I was becoming one of those mothers who couldn't let go. So I made a decision. I would step back. I stopped calling as often. I waited for Natalie to contact me first. I visited less frequently. I kept my opinions to myself. I gave her space. Weeks passed, then months. Instead of improving our relationship, the distance seemed to grow larger. That was the part that confused me most. If I truly had been the problem, shouldn't things have improved after I changed my behavior? Shouldn't Natalie have seemed happier, closer, more comfortable? Instead, she seemed even colder. One evening, I called to invite the family over for dinner. Natalie hesitated before answering. "We already have plans." "Maybe next weekend?" I asked. "I don't know. We'll see." The call ended less than a minute later. I sat alone at my kitchen table staring at my phone. The silence felt heavier than usual. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder whether someone was influencing her. The thought felt ridiculous. Natalie was a smart, independent woman. No one controlled her. At least, that was what I told myself. Still, certain things bothered me. Whenever she criticized me, the language sounded strangely familiar. The phrases repeated. The complaints repeated, almost word for word. "You always have an opinion. You don't respect boundaries. You make people uncomfortable. You need to stop interfering." Different conversations, different situations, the exact same accusations. It felt rehearsed, as though someone had handed her a script. I hated myself for even thinking it, because the alternative was worse. The alternative was believing my daughter genuinely saw me that way. One Saturday afternoon, I attended Sophie's soccer game. I arrived early and sat alone on the bleachers. When Natalie and Ethan arrived, I waved. Natalie smiled politely. Ethan smiled warmly. Yet something felt different. As I watched them walk toward me, I noticed Ethan leaning close to Natalie and whispering something. Immediately, her smile disappeared. By the time they reached me, her entire demeanor had changed. She barely spoke. The moment lasted only seconds, but I couldn't shake it. For the first time, a quiet voice inside me whispered a question I wasn't ready to answer. What if the problem wasn't Natalie? And what if the man everyone trusted most was hiding something none of us could see? After Sophie's soccer game, I spent several days trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. It would have been easier that way. Easier to believe I was simply an aging mother struggling to adjust to her daughter's independence. Easier to believe that the distance between Natalie and me was natural. But the more I thought about it, the more certain details refused to leave my mind. Especially the way Ethan had whispered something to Natalie, and how quickly her mood had changed afterward. I told myself not to overthink it. Then, another incident happened. A few weeks later, Natalie called unexpectedly. For a moment, I felt a surge of happiness. Maybe things were finally getting better. Maybe she wanted to talk. Maybe she missed me. Instead, the conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. After exchanging a few pleasantries, she suddenly said something that caught me completely off guard. "Mom, Ethan feels uncomfortable sometimes." I frowned. "Uncomfortable about what?" There was a pause. Then she sighed. "He thinks you don't really trust him." The statement stunned me. I've never said anything like that. "I know, but he can feel it." I sat quietly for a moment. The accusation seemed strange. Not because it was harsh, because it wasn't true. For years, I had defended Ethan whenever anyone questioned him. I had praised him, supported him, welcomed him into our family. If there was one thing Ethan could never honestly accuse me of, it was distrusting him. "Natalie," I said carefully, "I've always treated Ethan with respect." "I know." Her voice sounded tired. "But maybe you don't realize how you come across." There it was again. The same pattern. The same feeling. I wasn't being accused of something I had done. I was being accused of something invisible. Something impossible to prove or disprove. The call ended shortly afterward. I sat in my living room staring out the window. The more I replayed the conversation, the less it made sense. Why would Ethan tell Natalie that? And why now? A few days later, I received an invitation to Sophie's school art show. I immediately cleared my schedule. Nothing would have kept me away. When I arrived, parents and grandparents filled the elementary school cafeteria. Children proudly displayed artwork on folding tables. The room buzzed with excitement. I spotted Natalie standing near one of Sophie's drawings. When she saw me, her smile seemed forced. Again, that same tension, that same nervousness. I walked over and hugged Sophie first. She wrapped her arms around me and laughed. "Grandma, look at my painting." I admired every detail. The bright colors, the smiling faces, the imagination only a child possesses. For a while, everything felt normal. Then Natalie and I found ourselves standing alone near the refreshment table. I decided to try. Really try. "Natalie," I said softly, "have I done something to upset you?" Her eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean?" "I feel like you've been pulling away." She immediately crossed her arms. "I haven't been pulling away." "Then why does it feel like you're angry with me all the time?" The question hung between us. For a moment, I thought she might finally open up. Instead, her expression hardened. "Mom, not everything is about you." The words hit me like a slap. Several people nearby glanced in our direction. My face burned with embarrassment. "I didn't mean. You always do this." Her voice was growing louder. "You make everything emotional." I stood there speechless, because once again, the accusation seemed disconnected from reality. I wasn't making a scene. I wasn't crying. I wasn't criticizing anyone. I had simply asked why we seemed distant, yet somehow I was the problem. Again. Before I could respond, Ethan appeared. Perfect timing, as always. "Everything okay?" he asked. Natalie immediately relaxed. "It's fine." Ethan smiled warmly at me, that familiar, reassuring smile everyone trusted. "Families go through rough patches sometimes," he said. The comment sounded innocent, supportive even. Yet something about it unsettled me. It felt rehearsed, like he had stepped into a role, like he already knew exactly what had happened. The drive home that evening felt unusually long. By the time I reached my house, I was exhausted, not physically, emotionally. I kept replaying the conversation, trying to understand how every discussion with Natalie somehow ended with me apologizing for things I didn't do. The following month, I decided to give her even more space. If my presence was causing tension, then perhaps distance would help. I stopped initiating most conversations. I waited for her to call. Sometimes days passed, sometimes weeks. When she did reach out, the conversations felt formal, careful, guarded. The warmth we once shared seemed to be disappearing. One evening, my sister Carol came over for dinner. She had always been honest with me, sometimes painfully honest. As we cleared the dishes, she looked at me thoughtfully. "You seem sad." I laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" "Yes." For a moment, I considered changing the subject. Instead, I told her everything: the tension, the arguments, the accusations, the growing distance. When I finished, Carol sat quietly. Then she asked a question that surprised me. "Do you think Ethan likes having influence over Natalie?" I stared at her. "What? I'm serious." I shook my head. "No." But even as I answered, uncertainty crept into my voice. Carol noticed. "You hesitated." "I don't know." She nodded slowly. "I've seen couples where one person controls the narrative." "What does that mean?" "It means they slowly convince their partner that everyone else is the problem." I immediately rejected the idea. It sounded too dramatic, too extreme. This wasn't some television movie. This was my family, my daughter, my son-in-law, real life. And yet, the thought lingered. A week later, something happened that made it impossible to ignore. Natalie called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded tense. "Mom, Ethan and I might not make it to Thanksgiving." I felt disappointed, but tried not to show it. "Oh, why not?" "We're still deciding." "Okay." There was an awkward silence. Then she added something strange. Ethan thinks it might be better if we spent less time around family for a while." I nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "He says we need healthier boundaries." Boundaries. The word again. Another phrase that had become increasingly common. I closed my eyes, trying to remain calm. "Do you agree with that?" Natalie hesitated. A long hesitation, long enough to tell me everything. "I don't know." The answer broke my heart. Not because she agreed with him, because she no longer trusted her own judgment. For the first time, I heard uncertainty in her voice, confusion, almost fear, and that frightened me more than anything else. After we hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen for nearly an hour. The house felt unbearably quiet. I looked at a framed photograph sitting on the counter. Natalie at age 12, missing front teeth, holding a science fair trophy, smiling with absolute confidence. Back then, she had trusted herself. Back then, she had trusted me. Now, both seemed to be slipping away. That night, as I prepared for bed, a realization settled heavily in my chest. This wasn't just ordinary distance between a mother and daughter. Something deeper was happening, something hidden, and whether I wanted to believe it or not, every road seemed to lead back to Ethan. I just didn't know why. Not yet. Thanksgiving arrived with more tension than gratitude. For years, our family had gathered at my house. The tradition began when Michael was alive and continued after he passed away. Every November, relatives filled my dining room. The turkey recipe never changed. Neither did the pie. It was one of the few traditions I held on to. This year, however, felt different before anyone even arrived. Natalie had confirmed only 2 days earlier. Ethan had apparently changed his mind about staying away. That detail alone bothered me. The decision hadn't seemed to belong to Natalie. It had sounded like it belonged to Ethan. Still, I told myself not to start the day looking for problems. I wanted peace. I wanted one normal holiday. For a few hours it seemed possible, the house filled with familiar voices. My sister Carol helped in the kitchen. My nephew Jason argued with everyone about football. Sophie ran through the living room laughing while carrying a stuffed turkey she had made at school. Even Natalie seemed more relaxed than usual. Watching her laugh with Sophie reminded me of the daughter I used to know. The daughter who called me every day. The daughter who once told me I was her best friend. For a brief moment, I felt hopeful. Maybe things were finally improving. Maybe I had worried for nothing. Then dinner started, and everything changed. We were halfway through the meal when the conversation shifted toward family traditions. Jason joked about how stubborn our family could be. Everyone laughed, even Ethan. Then my sister Carol smiled and said something innocent. Joanna has always been the one holding everybody together. The comment should have passed unnoticed. Instead, an uncomfortable silence followed. I looked up. Natalie was staring at her plate. Ethan was sipping his drink. Something immediately felt wrong. Carol noticed it too. "Oh, come on," she said with a laugh. "You know it's true." Before anyone else could respond, Natalie suddenly put down her fork. The sound echoed through the room. "I don't think that's always a good thing." The room fell silent. I felt my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" Carol asked. Natalie shrugged. "Sometimes people don't know when to let go." Nobody spoke. I could feel every pair of eyes shifting between us. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Natalie," she sighed dramatically. "Mom, this isn't a secret." A strange feeling crept through my chest. The sensation that I had somehow entered a conversation I didn't know was happening. "What isn't a secret?" I asked. She looked directly at me. "You're always involved in everything." The room became painfully quiet. I heard someone set down a glass. Someone else cleared their throat. No one knew what to say. I certainly didn't. "I don't understand." "Exactly." Her voice carried more frustration than I had heard in years. "You never understand." I stared at her, completely blindsided. "What are you talking about?" "You always have an opinion." There it was again. That phrase, the same phrase, word for word. My heart sank. I had heard it before, several times, always in the exact same way, as though it had been memorized. "Natalie," I said softly, "if I've upset you, we can talk privately." "Why privately?" She laughed bitterly. "Everybody already knows." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Sophie had stopped eating. The child was staring at her parents with wide eyes. I wanted the conversation to end, not because I was guilty, because I could see it was hurting everyone, especially Sophie. "Natalie," I repeated, "let's discuss this later." But she wasn't listening. For the first time in my life, my daughter looked at me as though I were her enemy. "You don't respect boundaries." My chest tightened. "You think every problem needs your input, Natalie. You make people uncomfortable." The words landed like blows, not because they were true, because they sounded rehearsed, exactly like the conversations we'd had before, exactly like the phone calls, exactly like every accusation over the past year. The same phrases, the same wording, the same script. I glanced at Ethan. He immediately looked concerned, sympathetic, supportive, the perfect husband, the perfect mediator, the perfect victim. "Maybe we should all calm down," he said gently. I watched him carefully. His timing was flawless, almost too flawless. Natalie shook her head. "No." Ethan reached toward her arm. "Honey?" "No." She pulled away. Then she looked directly at me. The pain in her eyes surprised me. For a moment, she didn't seem angry. She seemed hurt, deeply hurt, and that confused me more than anything. Because whatever she believed, she truly believed it. Someone had convinced her that I was hurting her. Someone had convinced her I was the problem. The realization broke my heart. "I love you, Natalie," I said quietly. The words were honest, simple, True. She looked away. Sometimes love isn't enough. I felt tears threatening, not because of the insult, because I barely recognized my own daughter. The old Natalie would never have said something like that. Not publicly, not intentionally, not to me. Before I could respond, Ethan stood. I think we should move on. Again, perfect timing, perfect wording, perfect concern. The room immediately relaxed. Conversation slowly resumed. But the damage had already been done. The rest of dinner felt like a performance. Everyone pretended nothing had happened. No one mentioned it again. By the time dessert was served, I felt emotionally exhausted. Eventually, people began leaving. One by one, hugs, goodbyes, promises to stay in touch. The usual holiday routine. Natalie barely looked at me. Ethan remained polite, friendly, calm, exactly as always. But something inside me had changed. For the first time, I no longer trusted what I was seeing. After everyone left, I stood alone in my kitchen loading dishes into the dishwasher. The silence felt overwhelming. Carol stayed behind to help clean. She handed me a plate. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she broke the silence. That wasn't normal. I nodded. No. Something's wrong. I know. She studied my face. Do you think Ethan is behind this? The question lingered in the air. A month earlier, I would have dismissed it. Now I couldn't. Because the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Every accusation sounded identical. Every conflict somehow positioned Ethan as the reasonable one. Every disagreement pushed Natalie further away from me and closer toward him. Yet, I still lacked proof. All I had were instincts. And instincts aren't evidence. After Carol left, I locked the front door and turned off the lights. As I walked through the dark house, I noticed something outside. Headlights. Natalie's SUV. I frowned. She had apparently returned. A moment later, I saw her parked across the street, not moving, just sitting there, alone. I watched from the window. Several minutes passed. She never got out. She never came to the door. Eventually, another vehicle pulled up behind her. Ethan's truck. He must have driven separately. The moment his truck arrived, Natalie immediately pulled away. The two vehicles disappeared together. A strange feeling settled over me. Something about that moment felt important, like I had witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. But it wasn't until 3 days later that my suspicions deepened. I was helping Sophie with a school project at their house while Natalie ran errands. Ethan claimed he had a business meeting. As I carried a basket of laundry toward the mudroom, something slipped from the top of the pile, a folded piece of paper. I bent down and picked it up. At first, I assumed it was junk mail. Then I noticed a hotel logo. My stomach tightened, because the date printed at the top matched a week Ethan had supposedly spent traveling for work, and the payment method listed at the bottom belonged to Natalie. For several seconds, I simply stared at the hotel receipt in my hand. My first thought was that there had to be an innocent explanation. There almost always is. At least, that's what I had spent most of my life believing. People make mistakes. Paperwork gets mixed up. Someone leaves behind a document that belongs to someone else. There had to be a reasonable answer. But the longer I looked at the receipt, the harder it became to convince myself. The hotel was located in Cincinnati. The stay lasted 3 nights. The date matched exactly with the business trip Ethan had taken 6 months earlier. I remembered because Sophie had spent those 3 days at my house. Natalie had complained about handling everything alone while Ethan was away. At the time, I felt sorry for her. Now a different feeling crept into my chest. Unease. The payment information made it worse. The credit card number was partially hidden, but enough digits remained visible for me to recognize it. It was Natalie's card, not Ethan's. Natalie had paid for the stay, or at least her account had. I quickly folded the paper and slipped it back where I found it. My hands were trembling, not because I had proof of anything, because I suddenly realized how little I actually knew about what was happening inside their marriage. A few minutes later, Sophie ran into the room. "Grandma, can you help me with my volcano project?" I forced a smile. Of course. For the next hour, I helped her glue pieces of cardboard together and paint fake lava. Outwardly, everything seemed normal. Inside, my thoughts never stopped racing. When Natalie returned home later that afternoon, I studied her carefully. She looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. There were dark circles under her eyes. Her smile seemed forced. Even her posture looked heavier than I remembered. I almost told her about the receipt. Almost. The words reached the back of my throat. Then I stopped myself, because I already knew how the conversation would go. Natalie would become defensive. She would accuse me of interfering. Ethan would somehow become the victim, and I would once again be painted as the problem. So I stayed silent. On the drive home, guilt followed me. What kind of mother discovers something suspicious and says nothing? But another voice reminded me of reality. I didn't have evidence. I had a receipt. Nothing more. That night, sleep refused to come. I kept replaying memories, conversations, arguments, small details that had seemed insignificant at the time. The next morning, I called my sister Carol. I didn't tell her everything. Just enough. I found something strange. What kind of strange? A hotel receipt. Silence. Then Carol asked the question I was avoiding. "Do you think Ethan is cheating?" I stared out the kitchen window. "I don't know." And that was the truth. I didn't know. Part of me still wanted to believe there was another explanation. But another part remembered the growing distance between Natalie and me. The repeated accusations. The manipulation I couldn't quite prove. Something wasn't right. The following week I saw Natalie for lunch. She had suggested meeting at a small cafe near her office. The invitation surprised me. Lately, she rarely initiated anything. For a brief moment, I hoped we might reconnect. The lunch started pleasantly enough. We talked about Sophie, work, the weather, normal things, safe things. Then I noticed something. Every time her phone buzzed, she immediately checked it. Every single time. By the fourth interruption, I smiled. "Ethan?" She looked up. "Yeah." Something about her answer felt strange. Not affectionate, not loving. Obligated. Like someone responding to a supervisor rather than a spouse. "Everything okay?" I asked. Of course, but she didn't sound convinced. The conversation moved on. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed again. I glanced down accidentally, only for a second, long enough to see Ethan's message preview. "Where are you?" Nothing unusual about that, except it was followed by 3 more messages. "Sent less than 10 minutes apart. Why aren't you answering? Call me, now." A cold feeling settled over me. I looked away before Natalie noticed, but the uneasiness remained. I remembered my marriage. Michael never monitored my movements, never demanded updates every few minutes, never treated me like an employee reporting to a manager. Love isn't supposed to feel like surveillance. When lunch ended, Natalie hugged me goodbye. The hug felt brief, fragile, almost hesitant. As she walked toward her car, I found myself noticing something else. She immediately picked up her phone, and her shoulders visibly relaxed, as though she were preparing for a difficult conversation. That image stayed with me for days. The following weekend brought another unexpected discovery. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just another small piece of a puzzle I still couldn't see clearly. I was babysitting Sophie while Natalie attended a work conference. Ethan claimed he needed to spend the day handling business matters. Around noon, Sophie and I stopped for ice cream. Children have an incredible ability to reveal truths adults overlook. That afternoon proved it. As we sat outside the ice cream shop, Sophie suddenly asked a question. "Grandma, why doesn't Daddy like you?" The spoon froze halfway to my mouth. "What?" She shrugged, the way children do when discussing something obvious. "He says you're always causing problems." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I forced myself to remain calm. "What exactly did Daddy say?" Sophie concentrated on her melting ice cream. "I don't remember." Then she looked up. But he says Mommy is happier when you aren't around." The words pierced straight through me, not because they came from Sophie, because they confirmed my deepest fear. This wasn't happening naturally. Someone was feeding Natalie a story. And that story involved me being the villain. I changed the subject immediately. I didn't want Sophie caught in adult problems, but inside, something shifted. For months I had doubted myself, questioned myself, blamed myself. Now I wasn't so sure. That evening, after dropping Sophie off, I sat alone in my living room. The house felt unusually quiet. My eyes drifted toward a family photograph sitting on the bookshelf. Me, Natalie, Ethan, Sophie. Everyone smiling, everyone appearing happy. Pictures are dangerous that way. They capture appearances, not truth. The truth was that my daughter seemed more isolated every month, more anxious, more dependent on Ethan's approval. And somehow, the farther she drifted from me, the stronger Ethan's influence appeared to become. I still didn't know what game he was playing. I still didn't know whether the hotel receipt meant what I feared. But I knew one thing. The man I had trusted for years was no longer the man I thought he was. 3 days later, I got the first real glimpse behind the mask. I had stopped by their house unexpectedly to drop off a jacket Sophie had left at my place. Natalie wasn't home. Neither was Sophie. As I approached the front porch, I heard voices coming from the partially open backyard gate. One voice belonged to Ethan. The other belonged to a woman. I couldn't see either of them. Then Ethan laughed softly and said something that made my blood run cold. "She still thinks her mother is the problem." For a moment, I thought I had heard him wrong. I stood completely still beside the partially open backyard gate, afraid even the sound of my breathing might give me away. On the other side, Ethan continued speaking. His voice sounded relaxed, confident, nothing like the careful, considerate man he showed the rest of us. "She still thinks her mother is the problem." A woman's laughter followed, soft, familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. Then the woman spoke. "How long do you think that's going to last?" Ethan chuckled. "Long enough." A chill ran through my body. Every instinct told me to leave, to walk away before I heard something that would change everything. Instead, I remained frozen. Because deep down, I already knew the truth was waiting on the other side of that fence. The woman lowered her voice. "What about the money?" My heart skipped. "Money," Ethan sighed. "I'm handling it." "You're taking a risk. I know exactly what I'm doing." The confidence in his tone disturbed me. This wasn't a man worried about his marriage. This wasn't a husband trying to save his family. This was someone executing a plan I clearly didn't understand. The woman laughed again. "You're lucky she trusts you." Ethan's response came instantly. "That's because she trusts what I tell her." The words hit me like a physical blow. I pressed one hand against the fence for support. For months I had questioned myself. Wondered if I was becoming overly sensitive. Wondered if age was making me paranoid. Now I knew I wasn't imagining things. Something was happening. Something deliberate, and Ethan was at the center of it. I carefully stepped backward, slowly, quietly. The last thing I wanted was for him to discover I had overheard the conversation. Once I reached my car, I locked the doors and sat in silence. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I replayed every word, every pause, every laugh, especially one sentence. She still thinks her mother is the problem, not Natalie. As if they were discussing a strategy. As if Natalie's beliefs were something being managed, manipulated, directed. I drove home in a daze. The entire world suddenly looked different. Like someone had handed me a new pair of glasses and forced me to see things clearly. That evening, I pulled out an old notebook and began writing. Dates, conversations, memories. Anything that suddenly seemed important. The hotel receipt, the repeated accusations, the phone messages, Sophie's comments, the strange conversation I had just overheard. I wasn't building a case. Not yet. I was trying to understand what was happening. The more I wrote, the more a disturbing pattern emerged. Every conflict between Natalie and me somehow benefited Ethan. Every argument increased her dependence on him. Every accusation isolated her from people who loved her, including me. Especially me. Around midnight, my phone rang. Natalie. For a brief moment, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. Hello. Her voice sounded exhausted. Mom, were you at the house today? My stomach tightened. Yes. I saw Sophie's jacket. I dropped it off. There was a pause. Then she sighed. I wish you would have called first. There it was again. Another criticism, another complaint, another boundary. I closed my eyes. Natalie, it took 30 seconds. I know. Then why are we having this conversation? Silence. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. Things are stressful right now. The vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard. For the first time in months, she sounded honest, not rehearsed, not defensive, just tired. I softened immediately. What's going on? Another pause, longer this time. I waited. Part of me hoped she would finally tell me the truth. Instead, she said something that broke my heart. I don't know anymore. The sadness in her voice felt genuine, deep, real. And suddenly I realized something important. Whatever Ethan was doing, Natalie wasn't participating willingly. She was drowning. Maybe she just didn't realize who was holding her underwater. The next few days passed quietly, too quietly. I found myself watching, listening, paying attention, not because I wanted to spy on my family, because my instincts refused to let the matter go. Then, an unexpected opportunity arrived. 3 days later, Sophie spent the afternoon at my house. While she colored pictures in the dining room, I prepared sandwiches. Children often speak freely when they feel safe. That afternoon was no exception. Grandma. Yes, sweetheart. She looked up from her coloring book. When people get divorced, where do kids live? The knife nearly slipped from my hand. What? She shrugged. Just asking. My pulse accelerated. Why are you asking that? She concentrated on her drawing. Daddy talks about it. The room suddenly felt smaller. What exactly does Daddy say? Again, the innocent shrug. The kind only children can give. He says some people ruin marriages. I swallowed hard. Then Sophie added something else. Something that stayed with me for days. He says Mommy would be happier if people stopped interfering. I didn't need to ask who those people were. I already knew. That evening, after Sophie went home, I sat alone on my back porch. The sun slowly disappeared below the horizon. For years, I had believed family problems came from misunderstandings, miscommunication, human mistakes. But what if this wasn't a misunderstanding? What if someone was intentionally creating conflict? The possibility frightened me. Not because of what it meant for me, because of what it meant for Natalie. The following weekend brought another unexpected clue. I attended a local charity fundraiser. Nothing fancy, just a community event supporting children's programs. Halfway through the evening, I spotted a familiar face. At first, I couldn't remember where I had seen her. Then it clicked. A photograph. Months earlier, one of Natalie's social media posts. The woman standing across the room had appeared beside Ethan at a business event. Lauren Mitchell. The name surfaced from memory. A financial consultant. Someone Ethan had once praised during dinner. I watched from a distance. Lauren appeared confident, successful, polished, and strangely nervous. Several times she glanced toward the entrance, almost as though she expected someone or feared someone. I didn't approach her. I had no reason to. But seeing her triggered something in my memory. The voice. The woman behind the fence. The laughter. Suddenly, I realized why it had sounded familiar. Because I had heard Lauren speak before, at a holiday gathering, months ago. The same voice. The same laugh. The same woman. I felt my stomach drop. The woman speaking to Ethan hadn't been a random acquaintance. It had been Lauren, a woman connected to his professional life, a woman involved in conversations about money, and apparently a woman discussing my daughter behind her back. I drove home that night with one certainty. The situation was much bigger than I originally thought. Much bigger than an affair. Much bigger than family conflict. Somewhere inside this tangled mess of lies, manipulation, and money was a truth Ethan desperately wanted hidden. And for the first time, I wasn't just suspicious. I was afraid. Because whatever he was hiding, he seemed willing to destroy my relationship with Natalie in order to protect it. After realizing the woman behind the fence was Lauren Mitchell, I found myself paying attention to details I might have ignored before. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't stop. Once doubt enters your heart, it changes the way you see everything. Every conversation, every glance, every silence. And lately, there had been far too many silences. The following Saturday, Sophie spent the day with me again. Natalie had a work event. Ethan claimed he was meeting potential investors. That explanation no longer reassured me the way it once had. Still, I kept my thoughts to myself. The last thing I wanted was to drag a child into adult problems. So I focused on making the day special. We baked cookies, watched cartoons, played board games. For a few hours, life felt normal. Children have a way of creating small islands of peace in the middle of chaos. That afternoon, while I cleaned the kitchen, Sophie sat at the dining room table, drawing pictures. She loved drawing. Every visit seemed to produce another stack of artwork. Most of it involved animals. Princesses, rainbows, the usual things children enjoy. I wasn't paying much attention until she suddenly called my name. "Grandma, look." I dried my hands and walked over. At first glance, the picture seemed simple. A family portrait, 4 stick figures standing in front of a house. Then I looked closer. The details immediately caught my attention. One figure stood near the front door. Another stood outside the house entirely. A third figure appeared to be crying. And the fourth had a large, angry expression drawn across its face. My stomach tightened. "Tell me about your picture." Sophie smiled proudly. "That's Mommy." She pointed toward the crying figure. "And that's me." Then she pointed to herself. I nodded. "And who is this?" "The angry one is Daddy." The answer came casually, without hesitation, without fear, simply a child's observation. I felt a chill. "And who's standing outside?" Sophie pointed toward the figure near the edge of the page. "That's you." I forced a smile. "Oh." She nodded. "Phew. You aren't allowed inside." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Children say unexpected things all the time, but something about the certainty in her voice unsettled me. "Why am I outside?" Sophie concentrated on her crayons. Then she answered, Because Daddy says you make everything worse. The words struck me harder than I expected. Not because Ethan disliked me. I already suspected that. Because he was saying these things in front of Sophie, a child. A little girl who loved both her grandmother and her parents. No child should be caught in the middle of that. I sat down beside her, trying to remain calm, trying not to reveal how shaken I felt. Sweetheart, did Daddy really say that? She nodded, then she returned to coloring, as though the conversation were completely ordinary. Maybe for her it was. That realization broke my heart. What else had she been hearing? How often did these conversations happen? How much tension existed inside that house when nobody else was watching? I changed the subject. Asked about school, friends, favorite books. But my thoughts kept returning to the drawing. Later that evening, after Sophie went home, I carefully placed the picture inside a folder. The same folder where I had started collecting notes. Not because I planned to use it as evidence, because something inside me whispered that the drawing mattered. Children often reveal truths adults work hard to hide. 3 days later, another conversation with Sophie deepened my concerns. I picked her up from school because Natalie had a late meeting. We stopped at a small diner for milkshakes before heading to my house. As we sat in a booth, she suddenly became unusually quiet. Normally, she talked nonstop. That afternoon, she seemed distracted. "Were you okay at school today?" I asked. She nodded. "Uh-huh." But something felt off. I waited. Eventually, she spoke. "Grandma, yes. Do grown-ups lie?" The question caught me completely off guard. Sometimes children ask difficult questions. This one felt different. Heavily, I thought, but I kept my voice gentle. "Sometimes they do." She looked down at her milkshake. "Even parents." A knot formed in my stomach. "Why are you asking?" She stirred the whipped cream slowly. Then she shrugged. "I don't know." The answer wasn't convincing, not even close. I sensed she wanted to say more, but something was holding her back. Fear, confusion, loyalty, maybe all three. I didn't push. Children open doors when they're ready. Forcing them only makes those doors close again. The drive home passed quietly. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation, or the drawing, or the growing sense that something was very wrong inside Natalie's home. The next week brought an opportunity to see things for myself. Sophie's elementary school hosted a family art night. Parents and relatives were invited to attend. Natalie asked if I would come. The invitation surprised me. Lately, she rarely included me in family events. I accepted immediately. The school cafeteria buzzed with activity when I arrived. Children displayed artwork. Parents chatted. Teachers smiled politely. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. Then I noticed something. Sophie kept watching her parents. Not casually, carefully, like a child monitoring weather conditions before a storm. The observation disturbed me. Children should not have to predict adult moods. During one activity, families were asked to work together on a collaborative drawing. I watched from nearby. Natalie suggested one idea. Ethan immediately dismissed it. Not harshly, not openly, just enough to undermine her. The kind of behavior most people would overlook. But once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Natalie offered another suggestion. Again, Ethan redirected the conversation. Again and again. Each interaction seemed tiny, insignificant, yet together they painted a troubling picture. By the end of the evening, Natalie barely spoke. Her confidence seemed to shrink every time Ethan corrected her. I suddenly remembered the woman my daughter used to be. Strong, opinionated, independent. The Natalie standing before me looked different, smaller somehow, as though pieces of herself had gradually disappeared. Then came the moment I couldn't forget. As families packed up their supplies, Sophie accidentally spilled paint on the table. A completely harmless mistake. the kind every child makes. Ethan's reaction was immediate. His voice rose sharply. "Sophie?" The little girl froze, not startled, terrified. That was the part that haunted me. Children who are merely corrected look surprised. Children who expect anger look frightened. Sophie's eyes filled with panic. Natalie quickly stepped in. "It's okay." But Sophie was already apologizing, over and over. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The sight broke my heart, because no child should react that way to spilled paint, not unless something deeper was happening. That night after the event ended, I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes before driving home. The pieces were starting to come together. Not completely, but enough. Ethan wasn't just turning Natalie against me. He wasn't just controlling family narratives. He was controlling the atmosphere inside that home. The emotions, the conversations, the boundaries, everything. And the person suffering most might not be Natalie. It might be Sophie. 3 days later, I received confirmation that my fears were justified. Because while helping Sophie organize her school backpack, I found a folded note she had written herself. It contained only one sentence, but that sentence changed everything. "I wish Daddy would stop being angry all the time." The note stayed in my mind for days. "I wish Daddy would stop being angry all the time." 9 simple words, written in a child's uneven handwriting. Most people might have dismissed it. I couldn't. Not anymore. By that point, too many pieces were pointing in the same direction. The growing distance between Natalie and me, the hotel receipt, the conversation with Lauren, Sophie's drawing, Sophie's fear, the repeated accusations. Individually, each piece could be explained away. Together, they formed a picture I no longer wanted to ignore. Still, I needed facts, not assumptions. Facts. Unfortunately, facts were becoming harder to find because every time I tried to help Natalie, she pushed me further away. 2 weeks later, she called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded strained. "Mom, can Sophie stay with you this weekend?" "Of course." Relief briefly entered her voice. "Thank you." Something about her tone immediately caught my attention. She sounded exhausted, not physically tired, emotionally drained. "Natalie, are you okay?" A pause followed, then a familiar response. "I'm fine." I almost laughed. Nobody who says "I'm fine" in that tone is fine, but I knew better than to push. So I simply said, "You know I'm here if you need me." Another pause, longer this time. "Thanks." Then she hung up. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, yet something felt different. For the first time in months, Natalie sounded less defensive, less certain, almost fragile. That weekend, Sophie arrived carrying an overnight bag and a backpack. While unpacking her things in the guest room, I noticed several papers sticking out from one of the backpack compartments. At first, I paid no attention. Then one document accidentally slid onto the floor. I bent down and picked it up. The moment I looked at it, my stomach tightened. It wasn't a school paper. It was a bank statement, specifically a printed account summary. Natalie's name appeared at the top. I immediately looked away. The document wasn't mine. I had no intention of invading my daughter's privacy. I placed it back into the folder and continued unpacking. But the brief glimpse I had caught was enough to disturb me. Because one number stood out clearly, a loan balance, a very large loan balance, far larger than anything I knew Natalie had ever carried before. For the rest of the evening, the image remained in my head. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe they had refinanced the house. Maybe it was related to Ethan's business. Maybe. The word maybe was becoming exhausting. The next morning, another unexpected clue appeared. Sophie was watching cartoons while I folded laundry. Her backpack sat open on the couch. As I reached for a blanket, several papers slipped out again. This time, I noticed something unusual. Multiple envelopes from different financial institutions, all addressed to Natalie, not Ethan. Natalie. A feeling of dread settled over me. I didn't open anything. I didn't need to. The pattern was becoming obvious. Money problems, debt, loans, stress. Suddenly, Ethan's conversation with Lauren about money seemed far more significant. Later that afternoon, Natalie arrived to pick up Sophie. The moment she stepped inside, I noticed how tired she looked. Dark circles beneath her eyes, tense shoulders, forced smiles. She looked 10 years older than she had a year ago. While Sophie searched for her shoes upstairs, I finally took a risk. "Natalie," she looked up. "What?" I chose my words carefully. "Are you having financial problems?" Her reaction was immediate: shock, then panic, then anger. The emotional sequence happened so quickly I almost missed it. "What? I just asked a question." "Why would you ask that?" There it was. Not confusion, fear. My instincts screamed that I had touched a nerve. "I've noticed you've seemed stressed lately." "I'm fine." Again, that word, fine, the most dishonest word in the English language. I studied her face. For a brief moment, I thought she might tell me the truth. Instead, her defenses went back up. "Mom, not everything is your business." The familiar script, the familiar wall. I nodded slowly. "Okay." The conversation ended there, but the look in her eyes told me something important. There absolutely were financial problems. The question was how serious they had become. 3 days later, the answer arrived unexpectedly. I met my longtime friend Diane for coffee. Diane worked at a regional bank. We weren't discussing Natalie. We weren't discussing finances. The subject came up completely by accident. At one point, Diane mentioned the growing number of fraud cases she had seen recently. That caught my attention. "What kind of fraud?" she shrugged. "Spouses opening loans without fully informing their partners." My heart skipped. "That happens. More often than people realize." She stirred her coffee. "One spouse handles the finances, the other signs documents without reading them." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What happens then?" "Usually a disaster." The answer came too quickly, too confidently, the response of someone who had seen it many times before. I drove home thinking about Natalie, about Ethan, about the strange loan balance, and about one uncomfortable possibility. What if Natalie wasn't simply stressed? What if she was trapped? A week later, another piece fell into place. I was helping Sophie organize old-school projects when she accidentally mentioned something unusual. "Daddy gets really mad about money." The statement came out of nowhere. I looked up. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "The bills." A chill ran through me. "What bills?" "I don't know." She returned to sorting papers. Then she added something else. "Mommy cries after they talk about money." For several seconds I couldn't breathe. Because children rarely invent details like that. They report what they see. And what Sophie was seeing sounded alarming. That evening, I sat alone at my dining room table reviewing everything I knew. The notebook in front of me had grown thicker. Hotel receipt, Lauren, the phone conversation, Sophie's drawing, the note, the financial documents, the comments about money. A disturbing picture was emerging. Then I remembered something else. Months earlier, Ethan had proudly announced a new investment opportunity. Everyone at the dinner table had congratulated him. Natalie seemed uncertain. Ethan seemed excited. At the time, I hadn't thought much about it. Now I wondered whether that investment had ever existed. The following Friday, I finally received the strongest indication yet. Not from Ethan, not from Natalie. From the mailbox. A piece of mail had been accidentally delivered to my address instead of theirs. The names immediately caught my attention. Natalie Berry Carter. Final notice. My pulse quickened. I didn't open it. I couldn't. But seeing those words confirmed my fears. There were serious financial issues, and somehow Natalie was carrying the burden. That night, I barely slept, because for the first time, I stopped worrying about whether Ethan disliked me. I stopped worrying about the damage to my relationship with Natalie. A much larger fear had taken its place. What if Ethan wasn't simply manipulating my daughter? What if he was financially destroying her? And if that was true, how much damage had already been done before anyone realized it? The final notice stayed in my mind long after I returned it to the correct address. I had done the right thing. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't violated Natalie's privacy. But I couldn't ignore what it represented. Financial problems. Serious ones. And somehow, despite everything happening around her, Natalie still seemed determined to protect Ethan. The question that haunted me wasn't whether Ethan was lying. By then, I was almost certain he was. The question was how deeply Natalie had become trapped in those lies. A few days later, I decided I couldn't stay silent any longer. For months, I had walked on eggshells. I had stepped back, respected boundaries, kept my concerns to myself. None of it had helped. If anything, things were getting worse. So when Natalie called to ask if I could watch Sophie for a few hours on Saturday, I agreed immediately. But this time, I also made a decision. I was going to tell her what I knew, or at least what I suspected. Not because I wanted to attack Ethan, because I was afraid for her. Saturday afternoon arrived. Sophie disappeared upstairs with a new art set I had bought her. Natalie and I sat alone at the kitchen table. For several minutes, we discussed ordinary things. Work, school, weather, safe topics. Then I took a deep breath. Natalie, I need to ask you something. Immediately, I saw her defenses rise. What? I hated that response. Not because it was rude, because it sounded prepared, like someone expecting conflict. Are you happy? The question surprised her. I could see it in her eyes. For a moment, she looked genuinely caught off guard. What kind of question is that? A simple one. Silence. She stared down at her coffee cup. Then she forced a smile. Of course I am. I didn't believe her, not for a second, but I continued carefully. You seem exhausted. I'm busy. You seem stressed. Everybody's stressed. You seem unhappy. The smile disappeared immediately. The atmosphere changed, just like it always did. I watched the walls go up, the invisible walls that had been growing between us for more than a year. Mom, there was a warning in her voice. I know you mean well. Then came the rest, the familiar script. But you need to stop analyzing my life. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was again. Exactly the same language, exactly the same phrasing, as though someone had written it. I leaned forward. Natalie, listen to me. No. She shook her head. You're doing it again. Doing what? Trying to convince me something is wrong. I stared at her, completely stunned, because I wasn't trying to convince her. Something was wrong. Even she knew it. I could see it in her face, in her exhaustion, in the sadness she tried so hard to hide. Then I made a mistake, a necessary mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. I know about the hotel. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Natalie's eyes widened. For a second, genuine fear flashed across her face. Then anger replaced it. What hotel? I realized immediately that I had pushed too far, but it was too late. The receipt I found. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. You went through our things? No. It was in the laundry room. You had no right. I wasn't surprised by the response, only disappointed, because she wasn't asking why the receipt existed. She was attacking how I found it, the classic response of someone avoiding the real issue. Natalie, no. She stood abruptly. I can't do this anymore. There was pain in her voice now, real pain, not anger, not frustration, pain. And somehow that made everything worse, because it reminded me she wasn't my enemy. She was a victim who didn't realize she was being victimized. Or maybe she did realize it. Maybe she simply wasn't ready to admit it. Then she said something that cut deeper than anything before. Ethan was right. The words hit me like a slap. I froze. What? He told me this would happen. My stomach dropped. Every warning bell inside me started ringing. What exactly did he tell you? She laughed bitterly. That you would never accept our marriage. The room went silent. For a moment, I couldn't even process what I was hearing. Never accept their marriage I had paid for their wedding. Helped buy their house. Babysat their daughter. Defended Ethan countless times. The accusation was absurd, and yet Natalie believed it. That was the frightening part. She truly believed it. I have spent years supporting your marriage. You say that. The words came out quietly, dangerously quietly. But every time something goes wrong, you blame Ethan. I stared at my daughter, the daughter I had raised, the daughter who once trusted me completely, and suddenly I understood something important. This wasn't about evidence. This wasn't about logic. This wasn't about facts. Ethan had spent years shaping a narrative. Years. He had carefully positioned himself as the victim, and me as the threat. Now, every concern I raised simply reinforced the story he had already told. No wonder Natalie couldn't hear me. She wasn't listening to my words. She was filtering them through Ethan's version of reality. The realization left me heartbroken. A few minutes later, she gathered her purse. The conversation was over. Before leaving, she paused near the doorway. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she said something else. Something that haunted me long afterward. Maybe if you stopped trying to control everything, we'd all be happier. Then she left. The front door closed, and I sat alone in silence. I don't remember how long I remained there. 10 minutes, maybe 30. The house felt impossibly empty. For the first time in months, I cried. Not because Natalie had hurt me, because I could see how completely she had been manipulated, and I didn't know how to reach her anymore. That evening, Carol came over unexpectedly. One look at my face told her everything. What happened? I told her. Every detail. The hotel conversation. The accusations. The comments about Ethan. The claim that I had never accepted their marriage. Carol listened quietly. Then she said something that changed my perspective. You're trying to save someone who doesn't believe she's in danger. I stared at her. Then what am I supposed to do? Her answer came slowly. Stop arguing. What? Stop trying to convince Natalie. The suggestion sounded impossible. How? Because facts convince people. Arguments don't. I thought about that all night. Maybe she was right. Every confrontation pushed Natalie further away. Every warning made Ethan's story stronger. I couldn't save Natalie by attacking Ethan. I needed proof, real proof, undeniable proof. Something so clear that even Ethan couldn't explain it away. That became my new goal. Not revenge, not confrontation, truth. Because deep down, I knew the truth existed. And somewhere behind Ethan's perfect smile, his carefully constructed image was beginning to crack. The only question was how much damage would happen before the whole thing finally collapsed. About 3 weeks later, Natalie called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded rushed. "Mom, can you watch Sophie overnight tomorrow?" "Of course." "Thank you." I waited. Something felt off. "Everything okay?" There was a brief hesitation. Then she answered, "Ethan and I have a business dinner." "Business dinner?" The phrase immediately caught my attention, mostly because Ethan had used similar explanations many times before. Still, I kept my thoughts to myself. "What time should I pick her up?" Natalie gave me the details. The conversation ended. The following afternoon, I picked Sophie up directly from school. She seemed happy, relaxed. As always, she settled into my house quickly. That evening, we ordered pizza and watched a movie. By 9 o'clock, she was asleep in the guest room. I was preparing to head to bed myself when my phone vibrated. A text message, not from Natalie, from an unknown number. At first, I assumed it was spam. Then, I noticed the attachment. An audio file, no message, no explanation, just an audio recording. I stared at the screen. My pulse quickened. For several moments, I considered deleting it. Then curiosity won. I pressed play. At first, all I heard was background noise. Dishes clinking, muffled voices, restaurant sounds. Then a familiar voice spoke. "Ethan." I froze. Immediately. There was no mistaking it. The recording continued. A woman's voice responded. "Lauren." I recognized her instantly. My heart began pounding. The conversation sounded casual at first, dangerously casual, the kind of conversation people have when they believe nobody is listening. Then Ethan laughed, and everything changed. "She still believes her mother is the problem." The exact sentence I had overheard weeks earlier, only this time it was recorded. Real, permanent, proof. I felt my entire body go cold. Lauren laughed. "I still can't believe she bought it." Ethan chuckled. "People believe what they're told long enough." My hands started shaking. I turned up the volume, unable to breathe, unable to look away, unable to stop listening. The conversation continued, and with every passing second, the picture became uglier, much uglier. Lauren lowered her voice. "What about Natalie?" Ethan sighed. "She's easy." The casual cruelty in his tone shocked me. "Easy." "She trusts me." Silence followed. Then Ethan added something that made me physically sick. "Once I convinced her that Joanna was interfering, everything else became easier." I nearly dropped the phone. For months I had suspected manipulation. Now I was hearing him admit it. Openly. Without remorse. Without guilt. As if my relationship with my daughter were nothing more than a strategic obstacle. Lauren laughed again. "What about the loans?" The loans. My stomach tightened. Ethan responded immediately. "She's already signed most of them." I sat down hard in a nearby chair. The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter, dangerous. The recording continued. Lauren sounded concerned. "She's going to notice eventually. Not before I'm finished." Finished with what I listened harder. Then came the sentence that changed everything. The sentence that removed every remaining doubt. "I'm not staying forever." Ethan sounded almost bored. "As soon as I clear the debt, I'm gone." The words echoed through my head. Gone, gone, gone. Not trying to save his marriage. Not trying to fix anything. Planning an exit. Using Natalie until it suited him. Lauren sounded amused. "And she still thinks her mother is the threat." Ethan laughed. "That's the best part." I felt tears forming. Not because of what he had done to me, because of what he was doing to Natalie. My daughter had spent months defending this man, trusting him, choosing him over everyone else, and he was laughing about it. Laughing. The recording lasted almost 12 minutes. I listened to every second, twice, then a third time. By the end, I felt numb, completely numb. The evidence was undeniable, not assumptions, not suspicions, not instincts. Evidence, real evidence, recorded in Ethan's own voice. The next question immediately followed. Who sent it? The number was unknown. No name, no explanation, nothing. I tried calling. No answer. I sent a text. No response. The mystery remained. But honestly, I didn't care. Not at that moment. The recording itself mattered more than the source. I spent most of that night awake, listening, taking notes, documenting key statements. Every admission, every lie, every manipulation. By sunrise, one thing was painfully clear. The situation was even worse than I imagined. Ethan wasn't simply controlling Natalie emotionally. He was using her financially, strategically, deliberately, and he fully intended to leave once he had extracted everything he wanted. The following morning, I almost called Natalie. Almost. The urge was overwhelming, but Carol's words returned to me. Facts convince people, arguments don't. If I called immediately, Ethan would find a way to twist the story. He always did. No, I needed patience. For once, patience mattered more than urgency. Later that afternoon, another realization struck me. The recording mentioned loans, multiple loans, not one, several. That explained the financial notices, the stress, the exhaustion, the fear. Natalie wasn't merely supporting Ethan. She was being buried under obligations she likely didn't fully understand, and somehow Lauren was involved. Not as an innocent observer, as a participant, a collaborator, maybe more. That evening after Sophie went home, I created a secure folder on my laptop. The recording became the first file. Then I added everything else. Photos, notes, dates, copies of information I had gathered. For the first time, the evidence existed in one place. A complete picture. Not yet enough to expose Ethan publicly, but enough to prove I wasn't imagining things. Enough to prove he was lying. Enough to prove Natalie was in danger. As I organized the files, my phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. This time, there were only 6 words. You're going to need more proof. Then the sender disappeared. No name, no explanation. Nothing. I stared at the message for a long time, because deep down, I knew it was true. The recording was devastating. But it wouldn't be enough. Not yet. For Natalie to believe the truth, the entire lie would have to collapse. And somehow, I had a feeling that collapse was coming much sooner than Ethan realized. The anonymous message haunted me. You're going to need more proof. 6 simple words, yet they stayed with me for days. Because deep down, I knew they were right. The recording was powerful, devastating even. But it wasn't enough to save Natalie. Not yet. Someone as manipulative as Ethan would find a way to explain it away. He would claim the recording was edited, taken out of context, misunderstood. He always seemed to have an explanation, and for years, Natalie had believed him. If the truth was going to break through, it needed to happen in a way that even Ethan couldn't control. I didn't know it then, but that opportunity was already approaching. 2 weeks later, Natalie called with unexpected news. Ethan and I are having an anniversary party. The announcement surprised me. Given everything I had observed, celebrating their marriage seemed strange, but I kept that thought to myself. Oh. It'll be our 10th anniversary. 10 years. The number hit me harder than expected. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of trust. 10 years of building a life together. And somewhere along the way, it had become a lie. We'd like you to come. The invitation sounded formal, careful, as though every word had been rehearsed. I'll be there. There was a pause. Then Natalie added something unusual. Ethan really wants everyone together. The statement immediately triggered my instincts. Why? Why now? Why gather the entire family? Something felt off. I couldn't explain it. but the feeling refused to leave. Over the following days, preparations became the primary topic of conversation. Family members discussed catering, decorations, guest lists, venues. Everyone seemed excited. Everyone except me. Because while they were planning a celebration, I was carrying a secret. A 12-minute recording that could destroy the entire event. The weight of that knowledge felt unbearable. 3 days before the party, I met Carol for lunch. As expected, she noticed my anxiety immediately. "You look sick." "I feel sick." I told her everything. The recording, the anonymous messages, the evidence, every detail. When I finished, Carol sat silently for a long moment. Then she asked the question I had been avoiding. "Are you going to tell Natalie?" I stared out the restaurant window. "I don't know." The answer frustrated me. Because I should have known. But the situation wasn't simple. If I showed Natalie the recording now, she might reject it. She might defend Ethan. She might accuse me of fabricating evidence again. The possibility terrified me. Carol seemed to understand. Then wait. Wait for what? The truth usually exposes itself. I wasn't sure I believed that, but part of me hoped she was right. The day before the anniversary party, another surprise arrived, this time in the form of a phone call, the same anonymous number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a woman's voice, soft, nervous. "I don't have much time." Every muscle in my body tensed. "Who is this?" "I can't tell you." The answer came immediately, almost rehearsed. My pulse accelerated. "What do you want?" "You need to bring the recording." The room seemed to spin. "What?" "The anniversary party." My heart hammered. The woman continued speaking quickly. "As long as Ethan controls the conversation, Natalie won't believe anything." I gripped the phone tighter. "Who are you?" Again, silence. Then she said something that sent chills through my body. "You're not the only person he's been lying to." The line went dead. I immediately called back. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. The mystery deepened, but the message was clear. Someone else knew the truth. Someone close enough to understand exactly what was happening. That realization both comforted and frightened me. Comforted because I wasn't alone. Frightened because I had no idea who this person was. The next evening arrived far too quickly. The anniversary party took place at an upscale event venue outside Columbus. The kind of place people choose when they want everything to look perfect. Elegant lighting, fresh flowers, expensive decorations, a beautiful illusion. As I stepped inside, I felt a strange sense of irony. So much effort had gone into creating a perfect image. And yet, I knew the foundation beneath it was crumbling. Family members greeted me warmly. Friends smiled. Music played softly. The atmosphere seemed joyful. But underneath it all, tension simmered inside me. I carried the recording in my purse, not because I planned to use it, because I couldn't risk leaving it behind. A few minutes later, I spotted Natalie. She looked beautiful, but tired. The same exhaustion remained visible beneath her smile. She hugged me politely, not warmly, not coldly, just politely. That hurt more than open hostility. For a brief moment, I saw the daughter I used to know. Then the moment disappeared. Ethan approached. Perfect suit, perfect smile, perfect confidence, the same mask he always wore. "Joanna." His voice sounded warm, friendly, almost affectionate. I forced myself to smile. "Ethan." For a second, our eyes met, and something unusual happened. For the first time, I thought I saw nervousness. Very slight, almost invisible. But it was there, a tiny crack in the mask. The realization gave me hope. Maybe he knew something was changing. Maybe he sensed the truth closing in. As guests continued arriving, I found myself watching Ethan carefully. The more I observed, the more unusual his behavior seemed. He checked his phone constantly. He kept scanning the room. Several times he disappeared briefly before returning, not the behavior of a relaxed husband celebrating an anniversary, the behavior of someone worried, someone waiting, someone expecting something, or someone fearing something. Then I noticed another familiar face. Lauren Mitchell. The sight of her nearly stopped me cold. She was here, at the anniversary party, standing near the bar, speaking quietly with Ethan. My pulse quickened. Why would a financial consultant attend such an intimate family event? The answer seemed obvious. Because their relationship wasn't professional, not entirely. For several minutes, I watched them interact. Neither seemed aware of my attention. Then Lauren touched Ethan's arm. The gesture lasted less than a second, but it felt far too personal, far too familiar. And suddenly, another possibility entered my mind. What if Lauren wasn't simply helping Ethan? What if she was emotionally involved with him too? The thought made my stomach turn, because if that were true, Natalie had no idea how deep the betrayal actually went. A little later, guests began gathering near the stage area. Someone tapped a microphone. The formal portion of the evening was about to begin. Speeches, memories, celebrations, the perfect setting for a public image. I glanced around the room. Natalie stood beside Ethan, smiling, trusting, completely unaware of the storm gathering around her. Meanwhile, I sat quietly with a recording in my purse and a heart full of dread. Because something told me this night would not end the way Ethan expected. And for the first time, I wasn't the only person in the room who seemed to know it. The room sparkled with celebration. Crystal glasses reflected the soft lighting. Music drifted through the venue. Guests laughed. Servers moved between tables carrying champagne. To everyone else, it looked like the perfect anniversary party. To me, it felt like a stage. And every person in the room was unknowingly waiting for the curtain to fall. I sat quietly at my table watching, waiting, listening. The recording remained in my purse. Its presence felt heavier than any object should. Across the room, Natalie stood beside Ethan, greeting guests. She looked beautiful, the same way she had looked on her wedding day. But now I could see something I hadn't recognized back then. A certain sadness behind her smile, a weariness, as though she had been carrying a burden for far too long. My heart ached for her, not because she had hurt me, because she still had no idea who had truly been hurting her. Eventually, the event coordinator stepped onto the stage. She tapped the microphone. The room gradually quieted. "Good evening, everyone." Polite applause followed. "We're here tonight to celebrate 10 years of marriage between Natalie and Ethan Carter." More applause, smiles, cheers. I noticed Ethan standing a little straighter, a little prouder, like a man confident he controlled the narrative. For now, he did. Several family members shared speeches first. Friends told funny stories. Coworkers praised Ethan's success. Relatives complimented their marriage. Each speech added another layer to the illusion. Then Natalie stepped forward. The moment she reached the microphone, the room immediately softened. Everyone loved Natalie, and despite everything that had happened between us, so did I. She smiled nervously, looked around the room, then began speaking. At first, her words focused on gratitude, friends, family, Sophie, the life she and Ethan had built together. But as she continued, her tone gradually changed. Something in her expression shifted. The warmth disappeared. The tension returned. I felt my stomach tighten because I recognized that look. I had seen it before, right before every confrontation, right before every accusation. Then it happened. Natalie looked directly at me, and everything stopped. The room remained silent, waiting, watching, expecting. Her voice trembled slightly. There's actually something I've wanted to say for a long time. My pulse accelerated. Several guests exchanged confused glances. Natalie took a deep breath. Then she said the words I had feared for months. My marriage has faced challenges. The room grew quieter. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the servers froze. Natalie's eyes never left mine. And one of the biggest reasons is because certain people never respected our boundaries. A familiar pain spread through my chest. There it was. The same script. The same accusations. The same story. Only this time, it was happening in front of everyone. Family, friends, coworkers, everyone. I heard Carol inhale sharply beside me. The room felt suddenly too small, too warm, too quiet. Natalie's voice grew stronger. Some people refused to let go. The silence became unbearable. I knew exactly where this was going. Everyone else did too. Then she finally said it, the sentence that shattered what remained of my heart. My mother has spent years interfering in my marriage. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone dropped a fork. Several people turned toward me immediately. I felt dozens of eyes settling on my face, judging, questioning, watching. The humiliation was overwhelming. But the pain wasn't what surprised me. The sadness was. Because even now, even in that moment, I wasn't angry at Natalie. I was grieving for her. She genuinely believed what she was saying. That was the tragedy, not the accusation. The belief behind it. Natalie continued speaking. Tears now filled her eyes. Every disagreement. She swallowed hard. Every difficult decision. Another pause. Every struggle. She looked directly at me. You were always there. The room remained frozen. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew what to say. I wanted to stand, to defend myself, to reveal the recording, to expose everything. Instead, I stayed seated. Because something felt different, something unexpected. Across the room, Ethan no longer looked confident. His smile had vanished. His face looked pale. Very pale. For the first time all evening, he seemed frightened. The realization caught my attention immediately. Why was he scared? This was exactly what he wanted. Wasn't it Natalie was publicly blaming me? The narrative was working. The story was unfolding exactly as planned. Yet Ethan looked terrified. Then I understood. He knew something I didn't. Someone else had moved a piece on the board, and Ethan knew it. Natalie wiped tears from her eyes, then delivered the final blow. Mom, you've spent years ruining my marriage. The words echoed through the room. The sentence hung in the air like smoke. A collective discomfort spread across the audience. No one wanted to witness this, but no one could look away. I felt tears threatening, not because I was embarrassed, because I could hear the desperation underneath Natalie's anger, the exhaustion, the confusion, the pain. She wasn't speaking like someone who understood her situation. She was speaking like someone trying desperately to explain suffering she couldn't identify. Then something happened, something nobody expected, including me. The event coordinator nervously looked toward Ethan. Several guests followed. Eventually, all eyes turned to him. The husband, the man at the center of the marriage, the person whose opinion mattered most. For several seconds, Ethan didn't move. Then slowly he stood. The room remained silent. I watched him carefully. His hands were shaking. Actually shaking. A detail almost nobody else seemed to notice. But I did, because I couldn't stop watching. Natalie turned toward him, expecting support, validation, confirmation, the final piece of the story. Instead, Ethan looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. His face had lost all color. His breathing appeared shallow, Lauren sat across the room, completely motionless. And for the first time all evening, I noticed fear in her eyes, too. Real fear. The kind people experience when they realize something is over. Ethan walked slowly toward the microphone. Every step seemed heavier than the last. The entire room watched, waiting. Natalie reached for his hand. He didn't take it. A strange murmur spread through the crowd. My heart pounded, because suddenly I knew something was about to happen, something none of us expected. Ethan stopped beside Natalie. The microphone stood inches away. The silence felt endless. Then he looked directly at me. Not Natalie. Me. His eyes filled with something I had never seen before. Defeat. And in that instant, I understood. The mask was finally breaking. Whatever pressure had been building behind the scenes had reached its limit. Whatever secret Ethan had been protecting could no longer stay hidden. He swallowed hard, looked around the room, looked at Natalie, then looked back at me. And when he finally spoke, the first words out of his mouth changed everything. No. The single word echoed through the silent room. Natalie frowned, confused. The guests exchanged nervous glances. Ethan gripped the microphone tighter. Then he said the sentence that would destroy the lie he had spent years creating. Joanna isn't the one ruining this marriage. The silence that followed felt unreal. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was as though the entire room had forgotten how. Ethan stood at the microphone, staring into a crowd that had expected him to support his wife. Instead, he had just shattered the foundation beneath everything. Natalie looked confused. Completely confused. What? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, the confidence he had worn for years was gone. The polished image, the charming smile, the perfect husband, all of it had disappeared. For the first time since I met him, he looked exactly what he was, a frightened man. No, he repeated. His voice trembled. Joanna isn't ruining our marriage. The room remained frozen. I glanced toward Lauren. Her face had turned pale. Very pale. She looked like someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. Natalie stared at Ethan. What are you talking about? He swallowed hard. For a moment I thought he might retreat. Lie again? Find another excuse. Then something unexpected happened. His shoulders sagged, like a man too exhausted to continue carrying a burden, or perhaps too trapped to escape it. Either way, the result was the same. The truth finally emerged. It's me. The words echoed through the room. A collective gasp followed. Natalie's face went completely blank. I felt my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. It's me, Ethan repeated. I caused this. For several seconds, nobody reacted. The statement was too large, too shocking, too unexpected. Then Natalie shook her head. No! The denial came immediately, instinctively, desperately. No! Tears began forming in her eyes. Ethan, stop. But he didn't. Because once the first truth escaped, the rest seemed to follow. I lied to you. The room erupted into whispers. Family members exchanged stunned glances. Friends looked horrified. No one had expected this, least of all Natalie. I lied for years. His voice cracked. I made you believe your mother was interfering. Natalie took a step backward, as though the words themselves had physically struck her. No. Again, only weaker this time, more uncertain. Ethan continued. I told you she was controlling. Another pause. I told you she didn't respect us. His eyes shifted toward me, then back to Natalie. The truth is, she was trying to help. I felt tears filling my own eyes, not because I felt vindicated, because I could see my daughter's world collapsing in real time, and no mother wants to witness that, even when she's been wronged, especially then. Natalie stared at him. The confusion in her expression slowly transformed into horror, because deep down, she already knew. Some part of her had always known. Now she was being forced to face it. Then came the next confession, the one that truly changed everything. The loans. The room became silent again. Ethan lowered his head. I lied about the loans. Natalie's breathing visibly quickened. What loans? The question sounded fragile, terrified. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time all evening, genuine shame appeared in his eyes. The business investments. Another pause. They weren't investments. A sharp intake of breath echoed somewhere behind me. I didn't know who it came from. It didn't matter. Everyone was focused on Ethan. Everyone. They were debts. Natalie looked as though she might collapse. What? The word came out barely audible. I lost money. His voice cracked again. A lot of money. The room remained motionless. The entire audience seemed trapped inside the confession, unable to leave, unable to interrupt, unable to look away. Then Ethan said something that made several people gasp aloud. I used your credit. Natalie's hand flew to her mouth. No. The denial sounded broken, childlike. The kind of denial people make when reality becomes too painful to accept. You signed documents. Ethan looked away. I told you they were business forms. My stomach twisted because I immediately remembered the conversation with Diane. The warnings about spouses opening loans, the financial notices, the debt. Everything suddenly fit together. Natalie began shaking. You said... Her voice failed. She tried again. You said those were partnership agreements. The room was dead silent. Ethan nodded, slowly, painfully. I lied. Those two words seemed to destroy whatever remained of the illusion. Natalie physically staggered. A nearby chair caught her before she fell. Several relatives moved toward her. She didn't appear to notice. Her eyes never left Ethan, the man she had trusted more than anyone, the man she had defended against everyone, the man she had chosen over her own mother. Then came the final betrayal, the one nobody could ignore, not anymore. Ethan looked toward Lauren. The movement alone told half the story. The room immediately followed his gaze. Lauren froze. Panic spread across her face. Real panic, the kind people can't fake. Ethan, her voice sounded small, desperate. He closed his eyes, then opened them again. We were involved. The words exploded across the room. Gasps, shock, disbelief. Someone actually dropped a glass. It shattered against the floor. Nobody cared. Every eye remained locked on Ethan. Lauren stood abruptly. Ethan, stop. But it was too late, way too late. The dam had broken, and years of lies were flooding out. It wasn't professional. His voice sounded hollow, exhausted. We were having an affair. Natalie stared at Lauren, then Ethan, then Lauren again, as though her brain couldn't process what she was hearing. The betrayal was simply too large, too complete, too cruel. I watched tears stream down her face, and suddenly none of this felt like victory. Because it wasn't. Victory would have meant preventing her pain, not proving I was right. The distinction mattered. A lot. Ethan continued speaking, almost mechanically now, as if confession had become unavoidable. We talked about leaving. We talked about the debt. We talked about how to manage everything. His eyes lowered. And I used Joanna as a distraction. The sentence landed heavily, painfully. I knew if Natalie focused on her mother, she wouldn't focus on me. Several people visibly recoiled. The cruelty of the strategy stunned everyone, including me, even though I had suspected it for months. Hearing him admit it felt different. Worse. Much worse. Then something happened that I will never forget. Natalie turned slowly toward me. Our eyes met. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. She looked devastated, broken, lost. And suddenly, I saw my little girl again. Not the angry woman, not the defensive daughter. The frightened child who used to run to me whenever life hurt her. "Mom!" The word cracked apart halfway through. I felt my own tears fall. "Mom!" This time, she started crying openly, completely, and all I wanted to do was hold her. Not because she had apologized, not because she finally believed me, because she was hurting, because she was my daughter, and because nothing, not betrayal, not lies, not humiliation, could change that. Across the room, Ethan stood silently, the truth finally exposed, the mask finally gone, the image finally destroyed. But the biggest shock of the night was still waiting, because while everyone stared at Ethan, another figure quietly stepped forward. Rebecca Lawson, the attorney I had consulted months earlier when my concerns first began growing, and the folder she carried in her hands suggested Ethan's problems were only beginning. The room remained suspended in shock. No one seemed to know what to do next. The anniversary party had transformed into something entirely different. The celebration was gone. The illusion was gone. All that remained was truth. Painful, ugly truth. Natalie sat motionless in her chair, tears streaming down her face. Across the room, Lauren looked like she wanted to disappear. Ethan stood at the microphone with the hollow expression of a man who had finally run out of lies. And then Rebecca Lawson stepped forward. The sight of her seemed to catch Ethan completely off guard. His eyes widened. For the first time all evening, genuine panic appeared. Not nervousness, not discomfort. Panic. Rebecca had been a respected family attorney in Columbus for more than 20 years. Professional, calm, precise. She carried a folder beneath one arm and walked with the confidence of someone who already knew the facts. Most people in the room didn't know who she was. Ethan did. That was obvious. Rebecca stopped beside Natalie. Then she spoke quietly. "I'm sorry this happened tonight." Natalie looked up, confused, exhausted. "What is this?" Rebecca carefully opened the folder. The room remained silent. No one interrupted. No one dared. "There are financial records." Ethan immediately closed his eyes, as though he already knew what was coming. My heart ached for Natalie, because each new revelation was tearing away another layer of the life she thought she had. Rebecca continued. Over the past 18 months, multiple loans were opened using marital assets and jointly shared credit. Natalie stared blankly. "What?" The attorney's voice remained calm, professional. "Some documents contain electronic authorization connected to your accounts." Natalie's face lost what little color remained. I watched her struggle to understand, to process, to breathe. The woman sitting before me was not the confident professional who managed marketing campaigns and led meetings. She was a daughter, a wife, and a mother, watching her entire reality collapse. Rebecca continued carefully. "We've already reviewed preliminary documentation." The attorney paused, then added the sentence that seemed to break whatever remained of Natalie's defenses. "You may not be legally responsible for all of it." For a moment, Natalie simply stared. Then she began crying harder. Not loud sobs, the kind of tears that come when relief and devastation collide. Because beneath the betrayal, another realization had appeared. There might still be a way out. There might still be hope. Across the room, Ethan lowered his head. He no longer argued, no longer defended himself, no longer pretended. The performance was over. Finally, for a long time nobody spoke. Then Natalie stood, slowly, unsteadily. The entire room watched. She turned toward Ethan. The silence felt endless. "How long?" Her voice barely carried, but everyone heard it. Ethan swallowed. "A while." The answer wasn't enough. Natalie shook her head. "No." Tears continued falling. "How long?" This time, her voice was stronger, sharper, more determined. Ethan stared at the floor. 2 years. Gasps spread throughout the room. 2 years. The number seemed impossible, yet somehow believable. Because manipulation doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, piece by piece, conversation by conversation, lie by lie. Natalie closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had changed. The confusion remained, the pain remained. But another emotion had appeared. Clarity. For the first time in a very long time, she was seeing reality without Ethan's filter. And reality looked very different. Then she turned toward me. I'll never forget that moment. Never. The crowd disappeared. The room disappeared. The noise disappeared. There was only my daughter, standing a few feet away, looking completely broken. "Mom." The word trembled. I immediately stood. Natalie walked toward me. One step, then another, until she reached me. And suddenly she wrapped her arms around me, the way she used to when she was little, the way she hadn't in years. Then she cried. Really cried. The kind of crying that comes from grief, shame, relief, all at once. "I'm sorry." The words broke apart between sobs. "I'm so sorry." My own tears returned instantly. I held her tightly, not because she apologized, not because she finally understood, because she was hurting, because she was my child, because mothers don't stop loving their children when those children make mistakes. Sometimes we love them even harder. For several minutes, neither of us cared who was watching. The room faded away. Nothing mattered except that moment. Eventually, Natalie stepped back. Her eyes were red, her makeup ruined, her heart shattered. Yet somehow she looked stronger than she had in months, maybe years. Because the truth, painful as it is, often gives people something lies never can. A foundation, the chance to rebuild. A little later, guests quietly began leaving. Nobody felt like celebrating anymore. The evening had become something entirely different. A reckoning, a revelation, an ending. Lauren left without speaking, without looking at anyone, without saying goodbye. Ethan remained near the stage, alone. For the first time since I met him, nobody seemed interested in listening to him, or believing him, or protecting him. The charm was gone. The illusion had evaporated. Only consequences remained. Near midnight, Natalie and I sat together in a quiet corner of the nearly empty venue. The crowd had mostly disappeared. Sophie's babysitter had already taken her home. The chaos was finally settling. Natalie stared down at her hands. "I should have listened." I shook my head immediately. "No." Fresh tears filled her eyes. "Mom, I blamed you." The pain in her voice cut deeply. "I accused you of ruining my marriage." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Sweetheart, you were manipulated." She looked away. "I still said those things?" "Yes." The answer surprised her. I continued gently. "And they hurt." Her eyes filled again. "But hurting people doesn't make you unworthy of forgiveness." The room became quiet. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Natalie whispered something I'll carry with me forever. "I was so afraid of losing him." The confession broke my heart, because suddenly everything made sense. The denial, The excuses, the blindness, the desperation. She hadn't ignored the warning signs because she was foolish. She ignored them because she was afraid of losing the family she worked so hard to build, afraid of raising Sophie alone, afraid of failure, afraid of change. I squeezed her hand, then offered a truth of my own. I was afraid too. She looked up. Of what? Losing you. The tears returned immediately. For both of us. And in that moment, years of distance finally began to disappear. Not instantly. Healing never works that way. But the process had started. The lies were gone. The truth was finally visible. And for the first time in a very long time, my daughter and I were standing on the same side. 1 year later, I found myself standing in the exact same kitchen where I had once cried alone after another argument with Natalie. The room looked almost identical. The same wooden table, the same framed family photographs, the same morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Yet everything felt different. Because the people sitting around that table were different, not perfect, not untouched by pain, but different, stronger, healthier, honest. And sometimes, honesty is the greatest gift a family can receive. Sophie sat at the table working on a school project. At 10 years old, she seemed lighter now, happier. The anxious expressions that had once crossed her face had largely disappeared. She laughed more, talked more, dreamed more. Most importantly, she no longer seemed afraid of making mistakes. That change alone made every painful moment worthwhile. A year earlier, she had been a child carefully monitoring adult emotions. Now, she was simply a child again, the way children are supposed to be. Across from her sat Natalie. My daughter looked different too, not younger, not magically healed. Life doesn't work that way, but stronger. The permanent exhaustion that once lived behind her eyes was gone. The tension in her shoulders had disappeared. Even her smile seemed more genuine, more natural. The previous year had not been easy. Far from it. The months following the anniversary party had been some of the most difficult of her life. The separation from Ethan happened quickly. The legal process did not. There were meetings, documents, financial reviews, difficult conversations, painful discoveries. The truth turned out to be even worse than we initially realized. Several debts had been accumulated in Natalie's name. Multiple accounts required investigation. Lawyers became involved. Financial experts became involved. The process felt endless at times. Yet with every challenge, Natalie grew stronger. Because once manipulation loses its power, recovery becomes possible. Slow, painful, but possible. Rebecca Lawson helped guide much of the process. Without her support, the financial recovery would have been significantly more difficult. Some debts were successfully challenged. Others required negotiation. The outcome wasn't perfect, but it was survivable, and that mattered. As for Ethan, he eventually moved out of state. I rarely heard updates about him anymore, and honestly, I preferred it that way. For a long time, I thought I would feel satisfaction watching his life unravel. I didn't. The emotion I felt most often was sadness. Not for him. For the damage he created. For the trust he destroyed. For the years Natalie lost believing lies. Eventually, I realized something important. The opposite of healing isn't anger. It's obsession. And I refused to spend the rest of my life focused on someone who had already taken too much. So I let him go. Not because he deserved forgiveness, because my family deserved peace. That decision changed everything. One afternoon, several months earlier, Natalie and I had discussed exactly that. We were sitting on my back porch watching the sunset. The conversation drifted toward Ethan, as it often did during those early months. I still get angry sometimes, she admitted. I nodded. That's normal. She looked toward the horizon. I wasted years. The statement broke my heart, because I knew she believed it. I also knew it wasn't true. You survived years, I corrected. She looked at me, confused. I smiled. There's a difference. The tears that appeared in her eyes told me she understood. Healing rarely happens all at once. It happens through hundreds of tiny moments, tiny realizations, tiny acts of grace, tiny decisions to move forward. That was exactly what Natalie had done. And I was incredibly proud of her. Our relationship also required healing. People sometimes assume reconciliation happens instantly once the truth comes out. Real life isn't that simple. Trust takes time to rebuild, even between people who love each other, especially between people who love each other. There were difficult conversations, honest conversations, conversations that should have happened years earlier. One evening, Natalie asked a question I never forgot. Why didn't you stop fighting for me? The answer came easily, because it had always been true. Because you're my daughter. She cried when I said it. So did I. Some bonds survive terrible things, not because they're unbreakable, because people choose to repair them, again and again. That choice matters, more than pride, more than blame, more than being right. The greatest surprise of all came from Sophie. Children understand more than adults often realize. One evening, she handed me a new drawing. Immediately, I remembered the old one, the picture where I stood outside the house, the picture that had broken my heart. This new drawing looked different, very different. The house remained. The family remained. But now everyone stood together. No one outside, no one crying, no one angry, just smiles, simple, childish smiles. I stared at it for several seconds. Then Sophie pointed proudly. See? I smiled. What am I looking at? Our family. The answer nearly made me cry, because a year earlier, she hadn't believed I belonged inside that picture. Now she did. That mattered more than she could possibly understand. More than any legal victory, more than any confession, more than any debt settlement. Family isn't about perfection. It's about belonging. And for the first time in a very long time, we belonged to each other again. That evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, laughter filled the house. Not forced laughter, real laughter. The kind that comes naturally, the kind that heals. Sophie told a ridiculous story from school. Natalie rolled her eyes and laughed. I laughed too. For a moment, I simply watched them. My daughter, my granddaughter, my family, the people I nearly lost, the people I refused to stop loving. A year earlier, I believed the greatest victory would be exposing Ethan. I was wrong. The greatest victory wasn't watching a liar get caught. It wasn't seeing manipulation fail. It wasn't proving I had been right. The greatest victory was getting my daughter back. The greatest victory was watching Natalie reclaim herself. The greatest victory was seeing Sophie grow up in a home built on truth instead of fear. As I looked around that table, I realized something beautiful. The lie had broken our family, but the truth had brought us home.